is there also this situation that we've got an aging population, so we have to have a lot of immigrants to support that for a workforce to support older people who are not working anymore, and where do you get them from? And that's why we have this immigration situation.
Well, it's certainly, we started off talking about the Treasury and the Bank of England and their worldview, and that is their worldview. Their worldview is Britain can't really get more productive. It doesn't really matter if tax rates are high. It's not going to affect what people do. And the only way that we can shore up the economy is by importing more people. Now, what's been shown is not only does that make everybody in Britain worse off, because the GDP per capita is going down, even if the overall GDP is going up, the amount per head is going down. But even the GDP is not being boosted by immigration overall, because lots of people have been brought in who don't work or who are low skilled. So it's definitely the way the economic models work that are produced by the Office of Budget Responsibility and the Treasury and the Bank of England. That is their belief system, but I believe it is wrong. And they set that belief system and those models independently of political judgment. And that is a huge problem, because if a future government comes in and says, we want to drastically reduce immigration, the Treasury will say, or the OBR will say, OK, there's less money to spend on the health service. Even though they're wrong, their model prevails. And, you know, the difficulty we have as well is that with a housing crisis where people can't afford to buy a house, with everything getting more expensive in Britain, it's harder and harder to start a family. So you have more immigration, puts more pressure on things like housing, which makes it harder for the British population to have a family. So it's a vicious cycle.
And does
it's a vicious cycle.
Maybe support the mega rich who maybe want their services to be cheaper if immigrants come in and maybe work for less money?
I think that may or may not be true to some extent, but I think it's been driven by partly by short-termist Treasury economics, which haven't proved to be true. They've proved to be the opposite. We've had 30 years of stagnation, which is the thing that I was trying to solve. But it's also driven by this globalist philosophy of we should care equally about any human being, regardless of whether they're from Afghanistan, Somalia, or Britain. Now, I believe it's the British government's job to look after British people, not to worry about everybody in the world. But if you look at Keir Starmer and his sort of human rights lawyer approach to the world, he and his friend Herma spent all their time working for organisations outside the UK because that is their belief. They don't believe that their main job is looking after the British people. They believe their job is giving reparations to the Caribbean or worrying about the human rights of people in Afghanistan. And that is they're just completely disjointed from what most people in Britain actually think.
It's so crazy. And I'm from a Jewish heritage, and the Jews were sort of alert to this very early on because of the animosity from a lot of Muslims, not all of them, but a lot of them. I mean, it's like 97 to 99% of people living in Afghanistan have unfavourable views of Jews. That seems to be where we're bringing people in from. So we're bringing more people in from those places who have unfavourable views of Jews than we actually have Jews already in the country each year. This is really scary. Can you see any way that this doesn't continue to become scarier, that we don't end up like Lebanon and Iran having Sharia law?
Well, I think that unless something is done about the situation we're in now, things could easily get worse. I think they could. And the only way I see that this problem can be fixed is electing a government with a different point of view, with not the human rights lawyer, we care about the world's population, we don't particularly care about what happens in Britain view, which is the Keir Starmer view. There has to be a government elected that takes the other view, but they also have to change the wiring of the British state, because the wiring of the British state And Tony Blair was the main architect of all this, the Human Rights Act, the Constitutional Reform Act. The architecture of the British state is very much the Keir Starmer worldview. So it's not good enough just to even elect a Prime Minister who wants to change things. You've actually got to undo all that stuff, because that's what's created the problem.
How did this Blairism seem to infect the Tories for so many years?
So if you remember back in 2005 when David Cameron got elected as leader of the Conservative Party, lots of Conservatives were talking about the heir to Blair. Cameron did a trip to the Arctic to show he cared about climate change. He hugged a hoodie. He did all this stuff, and it was, it was all about, they wanted to be like Blair. They thought that Blair had moved the political landscape. And all of those people, the Danny Finkelsteins, the Michael Goves, the George Osbornes, they wanted to be like Blair. They called Blair the master. And that was the only way they thought they could win the 2010 election. Now, I also think that Conservatives didn't really fully understand what Blair was doing with the sort of constitutional tinkering I've talked about, empowering the legal system, empowering judges, empowering human rights lawyers, taking power away on economic decisions. Say what happened with the Bank of England being made independent, what happened with the civil service being... I don't think they fully understood how radical Blair had been.
Do you think Blair fully understood that?
Yes.
He's quite smart.
He is quite clever, yeah.
He's a good speaker. That's why people wanted to emulate him. He's a very good speaker. He's quite good looking.
He's very clever.
He's got the look.
He's very clever. There's no doubt about that.
You spoke of another party would have to go in and just rip things up, I suppose. Maybe a little bit like Milei in Argentina, something like that.
Oh, definitely.
Musk and Trump. Would this be...
I think we need Milei, Musk, Trump. What I have learned from talking to sort of friends, fellow travellers in other countries, is just how much worse the British state is.
Oh, really?
So if you speak to Canadians or Australians or Americans, they will say, yeah, we've got a problem with our bureaucracy, we've got a problem with our deep state, but it's nothing like as bad as your problem is. And I think the first thing people in Britain have to understand is how much worse we have it in terms of the power of the unelected in Britain compared to Canada, the US. And even in the US, Trump has had to take some pretty radical steps to get back control for the executive to actually be able to do stuff. And he's facing legal suits, he's facing onslaught of the Democrats, he's facing all this stuff because things in America were bad. But my message here is things here are worse.